This video is for the students that are enrolled on my online revision program. And this PDF is to prepare you for any test that may be coming up in microeconomics. So the first slide we have here is market failure. And I just want to mention that these slides are all in random order because in a real test you wouldn't necessarily expect the questions to come up in a perfect order. First slide is on market failure. So the free market on its own without any government intervention, it can be a good thing. Alright, so some examples include competitive markets. Competitive markets, they drive down prices, okay, which is good for the consumers. It's good for society as a whole. All right, businesses, they're rewarded with profit for producing products that people actually want. So with the free market system, having competitive markets, it makes good use of our limited resources. But the free market can fail. So we have this thing called market failure, and we're going to go through a couple of these market failures today. The first problem that I want to go through is the externality problem. Okay, so the externality problem. The free market doesn't really care about the problems caused outside of the buyer and seller's transaction. And while a lot of the time that's okay, some of the time it's not. Okay, we have these things called externalities. Right, we have negative externalities and positive externalities, and what they are is either a negative effect or a positive effect on a third party. If negative externalities are being produced, it means that the economy or the firms are probably going to be producing too much of this good. You're producing or consuming too much of this thing, which is going to degrade society's welfare. On the other hand, we have positive externalities, and because things with this, we don't produce enough of them. Okay, so too little is going to be produced. Therefore, we have a misallocation of our scarce resources. So externalities, they can be production externalities, so as a result of production, or they can also be consumption externalities, so as a result of your direct consumption of a good or service. So consumption externalities, they're part of the demerit and merit good problem, which you may have heard of. And they are either good or bad for us. So demerit goods are bad for us, whereas merit goods are good for us. So that means we don't consume enough of the merit goods, but we consume too many demerit goods as standard in a free market without intervention. The next type of market failure is a monopoly. Okay, or when there is too much power among some firms. So monopoly situation, right? Like I said before, in most markets we would expect some competition. However, when a firm becomes very successful, a lot of the time it can gain too much market power. So a seller can become a monopoly power, and a monopoly power is defined as a firm with over 25% market share. The pure sense of a monopoly is when the whole market is one firm, but in reality we tend to focus on monopoly power. So what it is it gives the seller disproportional price setting power. Because there are no viable substitutes for the consumers, it means that they're going to be forced to pay a higher price than if the market were a competitive market. So what we'd expect is the monopoly to maximize its own welfare, charge higher prices to make more profit per unit, and as a result, that will result in lower output in total, because consumers are going to demand less. Therefore, there'll be a misallocation of resources again. A monopoly won't produce enough to satisfy needs and wants in the economy because it's going to be pricing too high to satisfy itself. Next slide we have on micro is, we're jumping a bit now, but elasticity of supply. This is something that people get wrong quite often. So it tells us how responsive firms are to a change in price. Here is the formula right here. This is an important formula to remember. So the percentage change in the quantity supplied over the percentage change in price is how you work it out. Of course, it means you're going to need to know how to work out a percentage change accurately in order to apply that formula. And we'll come to that later on. So the thing is, generally, when prices rise, let's say for example, demand has gone up and it's caused price to rise, we would expect firms to be very keen to sell a lot more because they can make more profit. However, sellers aren't always as keen as you might think. Sometimes a seller is restricted. So maybe, for example, they're near full capacity. Let's say, for example, they're operating at 90% capacity already, and there's been this huge spike in demand. They can't really be as responsive as you might hope. So the other thing is the production process may be very lengthy or complex. Okay, and all these things, it results in the supply curve being inelastic, which would mean that the supply curve is steeper in its appearance. Okay, an elastic curve on the other hand would be flatter. An elastic curve would basically mean that if demand were to rise, sellers would be very keen to respond and not necessarily put the price up of the good in response. Or that they would put the price up, but maybe minimally. The other thing is the demand curve. This is essential for you to understand. Alright, so the definition of the demand curve, which a lot of people actually make a mistake on, is how willing and able, basically this curve, it shows us how willing and able consumers are to purchase a good or service at a given price, at a given point in time. It's drawn on the assumption that only the price of the good itself can change. Okay, that's why with the demand curve, it's a downward sloping curve, with price on one axis and quantity on the other. That basically, with the demand curve, only the price can change. If there's any other change in any other factor, basically these called non-price factors, it will cause a curve shift. And some of these factors will include disposable income. So if your disposable income were to rise, we'd expect demand to shift to the right for a normal good. Advertising is another one. So pump more advertising into the business, then we would expect an increase in demand also. Seasonal changes, so like right now it's Christmas time, people are going crazy at the moment, they're very willing and able to spend. Fashion and trends is another one. So like if something comes into fashion, you know, you would expect the demand curve to shift to the right, or if something's a trend right now, we'd expect the demand for that thing to shift to the right. And there's loads of different factors, to be honest with you, of demand. If you want to see a more complete list, just go to my website and you'll see a big list there. But a lot of these things are logical. Basically, if you think something is going to increase demand and it's a non-price factor, then it's very likely it's going to shift the demand curve. The next thing we're going to talk about is economic resources. Again, a lot of people, they get confused by this. You got to realize that economic resources are scarce. These are also referred to as our factors of production or our factor inputs, and that's what people forget. That and that basically is the same thing. And these are economic resources, our factors of production. Next slide, income elasticity of demand, YED. What it does, it tells us if a good is normal or inferior. So a normal good is a good that we want more of when we get, when our income goes up, when we get richer. Okay, so if the YED is positive, it will tell us it's a normal good. Whereas if it's negative, it will be an inferior good. If we look at the elasticity figure, when we calculate YED, it will tell us if it's a luxury or a necessity. If we have strong elasticity, it will suggest a luxury. So strong elasticity is a figure above 1. If it's weak elasticity, so inelastic, it will be between 0 and 1, which would suggest a necessity. Okay, so if it's like plus 0.5, that would be called a normal necessity. Okay, percentage change in quantity over percentage change in incomes is the formula. How to calculate a percentage change. So we talked about this earlier on, very important. So I'll give you an example. So here's a percentage change we want to calculate. £95, it goes down to £72. Okay, what's the change? So first of all, step 1, work out what is the change as a number. Okay, it's gone down by 23, so that's minus £23. The next step is, what was the price before? The price was 95, because it says 95 first and then it reduces. So first of all, work out the reduction. Remember the sign, minus. And then what was the price? And then step 3, you just do the answers for step 1 divided by the answer for step 2 times 100. And then you'll get the percentage change. Therefore, it's a 24.2% price reduction. Next thing we're going to talk about is positive externalities. So there's a little equation that you should know. Social benefit equals private benefit plus external benefit. Okay, so basically if social benefit and private benefit are not equal, it must mean that there's an external benefit there. Okay, so if there's an economic activity, right, where the social benefit is greater than the private benefit, this will mean a positive externality, right? Which basically means that that society's benefit as a whole is better off than just the individual's benefit. So we should consume more of this thing or produce more of it. Negative externalities, on the other hand, is social cost, when the social cost is bigger than the private cost. Again, just like the one above, this formula applies. So social cost equals private cost plus external cost. Right, so if an economic activity means social cost is bigger than private cost, it means the cost to society is greater than the cost the individual pays, which must mean there's a negative externality somewhere. Okay, so we should basically, this would be, it could be consumption externalities or production. Overall, we need to produce less of it. Government intervention. All right, this is actually a response to a market failure. So this is where we have mixed economies, okay? Because at the beginning of the course, you probably learned free market economies, command economies, and then you learned mixed economies. In mixed economies, we have governments to intervene when the market fails, okay? Markets fail and they cause a lack of welfare, like we just said, okay? And the government's objective is to maximize the welfare of society, obviously as long as it's not a corrupt government. So what sort of stuff they can do? They can tax, they can subsidize, they can set regulations and laws, they can set price ceilings and price floors in markets to control them. They can also provide a good or service themselves. They can actually provide, all right, if they believe the free market won't provide enough of it. So for example, NHS in the UK and free public schools, right? The NHS is there because the government believes without it, not enough people would get access to healthcare, because everyone would have to pay for it, would have to get some sort of insurance. So the NHS is there provided by the government in order to ensure that people actually use it and can use it when they need to. The thing is, the government can fail, so it intervenes using some of these methods. There's also more methods. Again, check my website for more. Okay, but when it does intervene, there is a likelihood that it could fail. Okay, what does it mean, government failure? Right, it means basically they've intervened, but it doesn't go to plan. All right, so what could have happened is the government could have wrongly worked out what the optimal allocation of resources was. The government may underproduce or overproduce. And yes, it is possible to overproduce a merit good. So the government could allocate too many resources to, for example, NHS or public schools, for example. They could spend too much on that when it's not necessary, which could be considered a government failure. So this would cause them to implement wrong policies as well. So if they've got the wrong information in the first place, the wrong policies are going to be introduced. There's a saying, rubbish in, rubbish out, which means if the government gets rubbish information, then everything that comes out of the government will be rubbish as well. The government also could have very high cost of administering policies. A policy could improve welfare, but if we have to pay millions to make that policy run and work, then it might not be worth paying for it in the long run, because the cost of actually getting the policy started and running could actually cost more than the market failure itself, what the market failure is costing society. If a policy costs 100 million and the market failure is only making damage of 20 million, then you could say that this is government failure. We're paying more than what the market failure is worth. So basically, there's a rule that governments should generally intervene if the intervention is going to cause a net social benefit. Okay, so basically it means that the benefit from the policy being implemented is outweighing the cost of the policy itself. So governments should try to introduce policies with the highest NSB, net social benefit. Jumping again, we're going to choice. Okay, this is quite an important topic in microeconomics that a lot of people forget. It's part of the economic problem, and basically the economic problem is we have scarce resources, but we want everything. Thing is, with scarce resources is we need to make a choice, because we can't have everything. We now need to make a choice. A way to show this choice is on a PPF diagram. You know, the typical PPF when you choose between good A and good B. When you're working at 100% capacity, you'll need to make a choice. If you want to make more A, you're going to have to give up some B to make more A, which implies an opportunity cost. The opportunity cost is basically the cost of the best alternative choice that you have. The next thing is externality diagrams. I've seen a lot of people make mistakes on this before. So, what is the socially optimal point on a cost-benefit diagram? Okay, well, it's the point where MSB equals MSC, right? However, the free market will rest at the point where MPB equals MPC. So if social benefits and costs aren't equal, so let's say that MSB is not equal to that MPB, then it's going to mean there's going to be a misallocation of resources, because these curves will all be different. They won't line up on the same place, and we'll show that now. So with the merit good diagram, which is this one here, I'll zoom into it in a minute. The merit good diagram, the MSB outweighs the MPB because the social benefits, the benefits to society, that's greater than the benefit to the individual alone. Okay, so if I zoom into it now, you'll see that the MSB is to the right of the MPB. And the social optimum level is where MSB equals MSC, so that bit there, that green dot. Okay, the point Q star on output. Okay, whereas the free market would, without government, the free market would rest at that point there, MPB equals MPC. And this is the problem, because the free market provides Q1, but we'd be better off if we provided Q star. And this is the same thing, or the opposite thing with negative consumption externalities. It's the opposite. So in this case, the MSB, the social benefit of something, of this demerit good, for example, is going to be less than what the private benefit is. So that must mean there's some sort of negative effect on society. Society benefits less than the individual. Again, that's here. So the social optimum is now here, MSB equals MSC. However, the free market is there at where the red dot is, MPB equals MPC. And if you look at the Qs, you'll see that there's overconsumption. Finally, we have tax intervention. This is something that a lot of people get confused about. Basically, when a government intervenes, it has the choice to implement a tax. And how do we work out what the tax should be? Well, here's some steps for you to follow, okay? So we have a demand and supply curve here. Sorry about the bad drawing, but I did this by hand. So, yeah. So the free market, it allocates at the point Q, right? So demand equals supply, free market, the government has worked out that it wants to achieve Q star. The government target is to reduce consumption and production of this good to a point Q star. Okay, so how does it do it? So identify the target is what you need to do, and you draw a line up, and where that touches the supply and demand curve, put in two prices. So can you see there's a price there, P2, and the price there, P3. P2 is on the supply curve, so that's the price that the seller is going to receive from every sale. Whereas P3 is the price that the consumer will need to pay for every good or service. Okay, so the consumer pays a high price and the seller receives a low price. So the gap between those two things must be the tax per unit. And if you ever want to work out the total tax revenue that the government's going to achieve, it's the tax per unit, which is P2 to P3, that distance there, times the quantity that's sold. And then that will enable you to figure out what the tax revenue is that the government would collect. So I hope you enjoyed that. That's obviously not a full course there that I've given you, but it should help you revise a little bit for microeconomics tests. If you want regular support from me to help you get the grades you want, why not join one of my weekly classes? It's very affordable and I'm running some free trials at the moment. Contact me if you want to find out more.